All right. Well, I'd like to thank you all for being here today. Dr. Tao Le is the editor of First Aid for the Board, so what he sort of walks on water and takes care of all of the material on first aid. The school and you actually have contributed to the USMLE RX product along with the electronic version of first aid and flashcards. And we will also be able to use this for the school's benefit to see how we're doing in particular subject areas and hopefully help everybody in their preparation for step one. Dr. Le has kindly agreed to give everybody an overview of the products that you'll be using, and I think you guys will find this very useful and helpful as you get ready to take your boards in the spring. So, Tao, if you would start, we're very anxious to hear what you have to say.
Great, fantastic. It was a pleasure to speak with you. I might have spoken to some of you before because I spoke to, I think, the second year's last fall as well too. So, but it's a real pleasure to be with you again. And Alan, just to make sure I'm addressing the right audience, these are all M2s, correct? That they'll be taking their boards next spring?
Yes, these are all M2. There may be a rogue M1 and an occasional faculty member lurking around.
Fair enough.
Are the M2s.
Okay, fantastic. Great. All right. So what I'm going to do in the next, I think we've got 15 minutes. Is that correct, Alan?
Yes.
Okay. In the next 15 minutes, I'm going to split half the time between an overview of the USMLE Step 1 and then an overview of the resources that we are working with Dr. Leslie and the education leadership to bring to the students. We'll do a walkthrough of that, and then we'll try to open it up for any questions. So at the end, I think the way we worked it last time, Alan, is that you fielded questions from the audience and then translate it to me, and so hopefully we'll be able to address any issues or questions that you have. All right, great. So this is a talk that I actually give actually every month. So you actually want the longer version of this talk, feel free to sign up for any of my free webinars that you can find on Facebook. We do this as a free service to the medical student community, and there's basically at the very end there's a long Ask Tao Anything section, and so this gives you a little bit of context here. So again, my name is Tao Le. I am an associate clinical professor of allergy immunology at University of Louisville, but obviously you folks know me better as one of the fellows behind First Aid for the USMLE Step 1 and our USMLE RX question bank series and digital flashcards and video series. And so one of the things that we want to stress to all medical students is the need to relax and take the long view in preparation for the USMLE Step 1. This is obviously not a sprint, but unfortunately sometimes we forget that, and we can occasionally get a little anxious, and occasionally we can get a little panicked. And I've been in your shoes, so I know how that feeling, when you feel like you're not ready. But all of you will be ready, especially if you take the proper steps in preparation for the USMLE Step 1 in a very deliberate way. You need to keep in mind that this is one of many licensing exams that you'll be taking for the rest of your life. Though fortunately that's becoming less and less of an issue. So that if you keep that in mind, you'll realize that this is just yet another hurdle. This doesn't define who you will be or who you can be. It happens to be something that that needs to be done to prove that you have a certain set of core competencies that are required to become a functional physician in American society. And so it's nothing more and nothing less. So think about it as just kind of as a minimal threshold. And so again, if you think about that, then you can really think about planning this for the long haul in a very deliberate and very calm way. All right, so in the next 20 minutes or so, we're going to talk about these types of issues. I'm going to skim through some of this stuff because a lot more of this you can just grab it right out of the presentation, which is on my blog, and I'll show you where to get it. And then so that we can then get to how you can best use First Aid and USMLE RX for your classes. All right, so just a reminder, the USMLE is a one-day exam. Roughly 8 hours, 280 questions max. It could actually be less than that, divided into 7 one-hour blocks. And each block has up to 40 questions, but not necessarily 40 questions. There, as you see here, there's a minimum of 45 minutes of break time. But the key thing here is that you can actually get more break time, and I'll explain why or how. So you'll notice the yellow blocks, these represent the 7 one-hour blocks. This red block here represents the orientation block. Which itself you are allotted 15 minutes to go through. And somewhere in the middle, you will take breaks for food, snacks, the loo, that type of stuff. The thing to remember about this particular orientation block is that this block is free, available to you now. You can just go to usmle.org, download all the orientation materials, and actually do this block right now. So in fact, if you do this block right now, or before you get to the exam, the only thing you'll need to do when you get there is to get in this block to adjust the audio to your headset for the handful of multimedia questions, and then you'll be able to actually collect up to close to 15 minutes of additional time. So you'll right off the bat you should be able to get close to an hour break time. The other thing to keep in mind is that if you do finish any of these blocks early, you're allotted 60 minutes per block here, but let's say you finish this block in 50 minutes, then that 10 minutes of extra time then rolls over into your break time as well too. So the bottom line is that you should have plenty of break time as necessary for snacks and all that type of stuff. All right, so on the exam, there is only, let me just get my arrow up here. There's only one best answer items. So you'll be given a number of choices, one best answer. There are no negatively phrased questions, so you'll never see, as you can see, I'm using a double negative here. You'll never hear never, you'll never hear not. You won't hear see except. Again, everything is positively phrased. There used to be these things called sequential items, which were multi-case questions tied together. You're not going to see that anymore. So that's gone from the step 1, so you don't have to worry about that. That was taken out about a year ago. You will see a couple of questions with multimedia, so that's going to have video or audio. And don't get too worked up about it because it's mostly simple things like lung sounds or heart sounds or gait disorders, and it's stuff that you've seen before, so I wouldn't get too anxious about it. The key thing to remember is even though this is a basic science exam, almost all the questions are case-based. So actually, it's going to be actually probably north of 85% these days. And you'll see a case or you'll see a problem scenario, and they often will have require multiple steps for you to actually solve the question and get to what actually is going on. So in this particular case, you might, see a case something like this. So you see a 32-year-old Caucasian woman who presents with a multi-day history of occasional symmetric double vision and ptosis. And then it asks you, what is the most appropriate diagnostic test? The first thing you'll notice about this particular question is it's not even asking what the diagnosis is, right? But it infers that you actually have to figure out what the diagnosis is to actually get to the real question, which is what is the most appropriate diagnostic test. So if you're thinking along with me, and if you've gotten through your neural block yet, you may be thinking something along the lines of myasthenia gravis, right? You could also be thinking about something like multiple sclerosis, but multiple sclerosis tends to have more unilateral findings as opposed to symmetric findings, and you notice that ptosis is involved, right? So some of the smaller muscles, and so if you recall from myasthenia gravis, right? It's an autoimmune disorder that that affects the transmission of acetylcholine at the acetylcholine junction. And so when it gets to what is the most appropriate diagnostic test, then ergo, then you're going to be thinking about something like edrophonium or tensilon test, as a way to actually test whether, by pouring more acetylcholine, that actually can temporarily reduce some of these motor deficits. So that's an example of a two-step question. On the exam, you may see three-step questions, you may see problem-solving questions, but two steps are a favorite of the USMLE. There's also going to be some single one-step questions as well too. So you'll see a variety. So this is the interface that you're going to be dealing with the USMLE. This is called FRED v2, or actually, I think we're beyond version 2 at this point. But it's a very simple interface that has, you can see the navigation tools at the top. You're going to see your case here. You're going to have images about or 15 to 20% of the time, or some sort of diagnostic information. You're going to have a minimum of 5 choices, but sometimes you'll have up to 8 choices because they're trying to minimize the effects of random guessing, right? And as I mentioned, most of the time you're going to see a case, and before you get to what's called the lead-in or the actual question, right? So in this case, this is mostly a one-step question, right? Because it's really asking about what's the most likely diagnosis here. Then you have your navigation at the left as well too. Now remember, you're going to have a block timer and then a day timer. So this is the amount of time you got left in one block. And then there's also going to be a timer that's going to tell you how much time you have for the rest of the day as well too. All right. These were some changes that were made last year to make the test more user-friendly for some people. So you can reverse out the color, so you can have a dark background. You can also control the text. So you can see here, you can have, you can zoom in to the text. And then also, you can also zoom into the picture as well. The key thing that obviously everyone wants to get to is passing, and what do you need to do to pass, and also what you need to do well, right? So the numbers change from time to time, but the mean has been at 229, 230 roughly. It bounces up and down these days. The threshold passing score is 192. It's been that way for several years. They do review this, but as far as I know, it'll be 192 next spring when you take the USMLE Step 1. The theoretical maximum is going to be about 300. Standard deviation roughly is 20 to 21 points, and they do actually have a percentile score, which I believe I have on the next slide. And the key thing for you guys is that you guys are going to pass. You guys are, almost everyone's going to pass. And so really the issue is, what kind of scores do you want, right? And so in first aid, we try to keep things pretty simple. We talk about just passing the exam, so getting up to the mean or beating the mean or acing the exam, and a lot of that actually has to deal with where you want to match. And I apologize for this mnemonic, but this is what's popular these days. The road mnemonic. So this is obviously a mnemonic that puts together all the very competitive specialties: radiation oncology, the surgical subs, the 3 O's and U. Aesthetic, which is plastic surgeries and dermatology. These especially obviously are very competitive, and they're inundated with applications. And so for better or worse, they have to use the USMLE Step 1 as a screening tool to get it down to a manageable number of candidates that they would like to invite for a live interview. Now, here's the key thing to keep in mind. Even if the USMLE Step 1 is really, from our experience, only good to actually getting your foot in the door. Once your foot's in the door, it's all about the interview. It's all about interpersonal connections, interpersonal skills, your dean's letter, and other things that's tied to the dean's letters. So the USMLE Step 1 is not the end-all be-all, though it is. It does play, unfortunately, an outsized role, in the screening process. So this is some data that kind of goes along with it. This is actually an O chart, but the reason why I showed this is because what happened here is they actually ranked ordered the specialties by the median matching score of the U.S. senior in that specialty. So you can see the ones that, again, the road specialties at the top. The numbers these days are more closely to the low 240s to high 240s. but this gives you the general sense. But the key thing, obviously, for the bulk of us, and I did internal medicine, my wife did pediatrics, is as long as you're, in the average, the step one shouldn't have a effect one way or the other. Exception would be if you're thinking about, like, say, internal medicine at the Brigham or general surgery at Duke, because these are very competitive academic programs. The USMLE step one has been used as a screening tool there as well. This slide provides more, hopefully, some context and allow you to take a deep breath and hopefully not worry as much. So the line that I want you to focus on is the green line here. This is U.S. seniors going into all the big specialties like internal medicine, pediatrics, general surgery, OBGYN, emergency medicine. What you'll notice is that even if students fail, get below a 192, probability of matching into their preferred specialty by step one scores is still going to be above 0.9, so 90 to 93% certainty of matching. Now, if you are interested in something like ear, nose, and throat, which is what my brother did, unfortunately, you will see a bit of a steep response dose response curve. But even if you go below average, right, you still, there's still a good chance of getting into your specialty of your choice, even if it's very competitive. All right, so in first aid, we do talk about a couple of schedules, templates that helps you plan for, for your preparation. Remember that everybody's unique. I do get questions all the time about how I should prepare for the exam, but everybody's unique and everyone has unique circumstances. But there are some rules that seem to pervade year after year. So one is, for a just pass schedule for the typical medical student at a U.S. medical school, you're looking at probably 1 to 2 months of intense preparation or some preparation that's a little added on, as part, before you get through your finals and so forth. Within that time frame, you will obviously be able to use something like first aid as a high yield guide for framing the preparation, as well as reviewing crammable subjects, and we'll talk about what those are in a little bit. And you're going to need to do lots and lots of questions. In the past, I would say, the data, when there wasn't a lot of data, at least one question bank, but now the data clearly says that you should do, at least 2 question banks, and I'll get to that that research in just a little bit. If you need to do better, or if you historically have had some challenges with standardized exams, you're obviously going to want to put in a little bit more effort, and the time frame there can be much broader. But it doesn't have to be months and months and months. It could be just as little as 2 months. So, in addition, we're going to be talking about the less crammable subjects, and you may be looking at up to 3 question banks or a 3rd question resource in terms of preparation. The other thing that you want to think about is how you prepare. The good news is that most of you guys have gone through this process before with things like the MCAT and the SAT and the ACT. So, you should trust in your past preparation. That being said, you'll need to understand the strengths and characteristics of the subjects that you're dealing with, and be able to kind of do some self-evaluation. And we'll talk a little bit about how USMLE can help you with that. And then also you need to be generally aware of the strengths and weaknesses in your curriculum as well too. I'm sure you have a fine curriculum, but sometimes some of them lend themselves better to USMLE preparation than not. It's not to say that there's any weakness in the curriculum. It's just the USMLE has a certain way of, lends itself to certain types of preparation. So, the last thing to consider is that if you have more time, this is kind of common sense. Like let's say you're spending a couple weeks on general pathology across systems, then you're going to be able to use a wider multitude of preparation strategies, as opposed to say something like neural anatomy, where you may only have budgeted 1 day for this, and you're going to be much more restricted in what you can do. So I am going to spend the next, I'm just going to check at my time here, a couple of minutes just pointing out a couple of key things here. I'm not going to read this to you because this goes through several slides worth of advice. This is on my blog at firstaidteam.com. I'll show you exactly where that is. In fact, Steve, I think Steve will provide Dr. Leslie with the actual link to this document, and that can be passed around to the class. So you don't have to take down all these notes. So this is going to be more detailed than you need actually. But there are a couple of themes that I'm going to try to point out, which is, even though again they call this a basic science exam, the good news is that they're going to really focus in general on basic science concepts that have some sort of a clinical relevance, right? So if it's anatomy, then it's going to be about landmarks. It's about what happens if you have a spiral fracture of the humerus in terms of what nerve goes through the humeral groove, and then what motor and sensory deficits will you have in your hand because of that type of injury. In terms of the clinical images, again, it tends to be clinically relevant, right? So it's not going to be cadavers. It's going to be things like, you're going to have to recognize normal, abnormal structures on CTs, X-rays, and so forth. You'll have a cross section, but it'll be a CT or an MRI. All right, so biochemistry is going to be one of those crammable subjects, and what you'll notice is a pattern with crammable subjects or crammable areas is that there tends to be a regular pattern. So, in biochemistry, it's pathways, it's substrates, it's enzymes, and so forth. And so, what inhibits a pathway, what excites a pathway, and so forth. So you're gonna, so those are, and then which ones have some sort of clinical relevance. And so those are the things, those are the patterns that are going to be easier to pick up for, and so therefore easier to get in. Micro is also similar because of that, because it tends to focus on a certain number of things, like how you make the lab diagnosis, target organs, where does the bug go, how does it get there, vectors, reservoir, treatment, that type of stuff. The key thing is that don't focus just on bacteriology. There's so much else to this as well too. Pathology is going to be one of those very big subjects that you're going to have to put in a lot of time if you want to do well, ergo above average, in other words, above average. Key things here to keep in mind is that they typically will stick with more, not classic presentations, but the typical presentations. Now they will put together a case in such ways that it could, that the presentation could be a little ambiguous, but nevertheless, it's not going to be a typical presentation of a typical condition. Characteristics of the patient, if they present it, it should not be thought about as a red herring. So they're not trying to throw you off. So the age, the gender, and should be typical of the presentation, as opposed to the rare exception. Now remember, there can be a wide variety of gender, age, presentations for a single condition, so just be aware of it. In first aid, we like to use buzzwords and trigger words and mnemonics and so forth, and those are all wonderful, obviously, for memory and so forth. But with regards to application, you need to understand or be able to describe the findings, with regards to what truly is an Osler node or Janeway lesion, as opposed to, because that's what they'll be describing on the exam, as opposed to saying, hey, somebody presents with a new murmur and a Janeway lesion, right? In the path and pathophys, this is where you're going to see lots of images. And the key thing here is that you don't often get a lot of orientation in the image when you see it. So the first thing I advise you to do is actually focus on the actual clinical case itself and go through the distractors before you look at the image, and you use the image as a piece of confirmation datum. In fact, a lot of times students have reported to us that they can get to the proper answer, more than half the time without the actual image. So pharmacology is going to be crammable, like biochemistry and micro, or traditional micro, because again, it tends to focus on a a pretty classic framework of mechanism of action, clinical use, toxicity, drug-drug interactions, adverse events, and so do keep that in mind. Physiology tends to be tied to pathology, and there it's more about the relationship. So students often use concept maps or diagrams to kind of understand, all the roles and relationships between, things like endocrine organs and hormones and so forth. Psychiatry, the key takeaway here is that even though we tend to focus on mood disorders and so forth, there's a broad array of things that get covered. First aid actually covers it pretty well, so as long as you hit the highlights, you should be able to grab the low-hanging fruit. Public health obviously has been a major part of the exam for many years, but in the last couple of years, they have put more emphasis on patient safety and quality improvement. You've obviously seen that in some of the new content that's in first aid. In addition to things like classic biostats, epidemiology, ethics, and so forth. So that was a quick whirlwind tour through the whole thing. Like I said, you'll be able to get a copy of this if you go to firstaidteam.com. So don't worry if you if you missed anything here. The next thing we'll want to talk about is review resources. And the key thing is that what I hear from students when I talk to them is that there are so many things out there that you can use. There's so many question banks and books and apps and so forth. What you gonna do, right? So especially since number one, you don't have time, and number two, you don't have a budget, right? And so so there's a couple of things. One is that we do, in the back of first aid, have a annual review of resources out there. And so even if you do not get the latest first aid, like they say the 2018 first aid that's coming out in December, do actually flip through it and look at the recommendations in the back. We also actually place an expanded version of this guide on our blog at firstaidteam.com. I'll show you where it is. And so use that as a guide in addition to other advice that you see or reviews on Amazon.com or so forth. Once you've made some decisions about what best fits your needs and your learning styles, you might as well go ahead, get those early, but don't overbuy. Buy only what you can use. So, you might quote unquote underbuy a little bit. There's things that you might be able to check out from the library or borrow from a friend, or get it, with two-day Prime, Amazon Prime delivery whenever necessary, right? And then the other thing to keep in mind is that there can be variation within a whole book series or digital series. So buyer beware in terms of what's good or what's not so good for your preparation needs. This has just been some general advice that's been helpful for students through the years. And so just to kind of sum them up here, once you develop a preparation schedule, check it with folks who kind of know you, who are third years and so forth. It should work out pretty well. You want to make sure you don't overschedule it, right? And you want to make sure that you put some of the crammable subjects towards the end. But otherwise, if you do that, you should be fine. The other thing to keep in mind is that being able to approach a subject matter in several different directions with several different methods, it helps create more solid cognitive frameworks for what you're doing. If you're restricted in terms of your methodology, then you're going to go mostly with things like questions, because that's that's going to be closest to what obviously the activity that's going to be tested when you actually do the exam. Your curriculum should provide you with a nice starting area, because some of your faculty should have told you, hey, look, this is the type of stuff that might get tested. And so if you've already covered it in your curriculum, it's going to be easier to cover it again, on the exam in terms of what you previously learned. As I mentioned, you want to be very deliberate about this. You want to keep the long view in mind. We do have a checklist that can help you get organized. So if you pull out your first aid, it should be right before section 1. It's kind of at the end of all the acknowledgments and how to use the book and stuff like that. But there should be a one-page checklist of things to consider in the months, weeks, and days prior to your exam. I'm going to pause there for just a second, just to see if there are any questions. Alan, do you see any questions from the students before we shift gears?
No questions right now. Anybody? No, we're good.
Okay, very good. So a couple other pieces of advice before we shift over into what's going on with USMLE and how you get the max of it. The bottom line is you should be doing lots and lots of questions. And there's actually great evidence in the Journal of Science that was published 4 or 5 years ago. And in fact, it made the front page of the New York Science section. Basically, what they found is that students who do lots of questions, either questions that they create themselves or questions that they get from other resources like USMLE, do better than people who just cram the same material like this over and over, or other types of study methodologies, even if the questions are more inferential and more complex. So if there's any takeaway, which is there's no such thing as too few questions in terms of preparing for the board. So the question is, well, where are you going to get all these question resources, right? So there are some things that are actually no cost, right, which is the USMLE sample test, 120 items or so. That's helpful for format familiarity. There is the comprehensive basics science self-assessment exam. That's about $45, $50. About 200 questions. There are about 7, 8 versions of them out there. It's helpful for benchmarking. The only problem is that they don't give you the explanations for the correct answer to distractors. For that, you're going to have to do a QBank like USMLE or UWorld or Kaplan and so forth, right? And so these resources have been around for quite a while, and they're very well established, and they're helpful for, obviously, not just for studying, but for also simulation. And they can also predict outcomes on the USMLE. With regards to the actual test day, obviously you need to dial back on any stimulants. You will be going into a testing center that is essentially an office building. So it may be cold in the morning, but in the afternoon, if the sun goes to the other side of the building, it might be a little warm. So please dress comfortably and flexibly. The questions themselves, the majority of them shouldn't be overwhelmingly large, but occasionally you'll run into what's a very deep case. If that's the case, then what you want to do is you want to skip to the question, which is called the lead-in, and then look at that first, and then skim through the distractors before, or I'm sorry, the answer options before you go back and read the case. And then when you go read through the case, then you can kind of highlight what you're looking for and better manage the clock that way. Speaking of managing the clock, you will have 60 minutes, up to 40 questions, which means at a minimum you'll have 90 seconds per question. The general advice we have given students is that you should commit to an answer within 70 to 75 seconds of reading that question, even if you have no idea what's going on. You can always mark that question and come back to it later when you have time. But if you follow the 70 to 75 second rule, you will have a good 10 minutes or so at the back end or more to spend on some of the more challenging but hopefully solvable questions. Energy level and sustenance during the day obviously is a key tactical thing to think about. So you just want to, you'll know more when you kind of practice with half-day exams or full-day exams. But a lot of folks just eat, obviously they'll either snack it or take a very, very light lunch. At the end of the day, there are going to be some questions that are going to be impossible to solve. Fortunately, some of them are experimental questions, so hopefully that's what you run into. But it's always good to have a standard answer, like in our group, in our study group in med school, we joked about the C reflex. So you don't know what's going on at all. You can't rule out a distractor. Then you just pick C and go on and not worry about it because you have 279 other questions that you have to deal with. So you got to be able to cut your losses and move forward if you run into something that's challenging. But again, remember that the exam has some very easy questions as well too. It's not all like really hard questions. At the end of the day, this was an equation that was given to me my first day of medical school, which is as long as you pass, you'll become an MD. So P equals MD. And again, this exam shouldn't define you, and you should be able to get past it and get through the rest of your medical education and hopefully make a fine contribution to society. So with that, I just want to mention that we do have a number of free resources out there for medical students. We are accessible through social media. Please like us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter. We have free resources like free flashcards and free questions on these in these areas. And then at firstaidteam.com, as I mentioned, we have tons and tons of resources. So in fact, I will just mention that. So let me just actually get you to that. If you are looking for this presentation, all you need to do is go to presentations, and then voila, under the presentations tab, you'll see a video of a recent recording, and a recent recording plus a PDF of the slides. And then if you're looking for some of the free stuff, then you can click here on the bunch, and then you can see, like for example, the rated review resources. That's completely free. As well as other resources, including updates and corrections. So I'll pause there for a second. I know we've got about another 10-15 minutes to talk about USMLE, but I just want to see if there's any questions before we move on. Okay, Alan? If not, we'll spend 10 minutes talking about USMLE.
That's great.
Okay, great. So I hope by this time most folks have been set up with their accounts on USMLE. Okay, great. And what you'll notice is that once you're logged in, even if you're at the home screen, you should see that you've got a dashboard. So you click that, that takes you to your main launching point, and where you should have access to your resources. And I think in particular case, it'll be QMax and FlashFacts. You'll have search, and then you'll also have smart notes at the very bottom as well too. We'll spend most of the next 10 minutes going through here, and maybe a little bit here. So a couple things about QMax itself, a couple tricks. So most of you have some experience with question banks, so I won't bore you, but there's a couple things. One is, when you create your test, you've got keep in mind you've got lots and lots of options, and so it can be fairly customized. And you say, hey, look, start me off with easy questions at the beginning of the second year, or maybe give me hard questions. And so think through these, so that you have so that to make sure it's part of your strategy. The most popular mode that students use is tutor mode, especially if they're using it along with their curriculum, because you get some feedback after each question. And so you can use that, so you don't have to wait till the end of the block to get feedback. The other thing to notice is that you can use disciplines and organ systems together. So say, for example, you want to do cardiovascular pathology, right? And so let's say it's all items. So if you do that, you click cardiology here, and then you click path and pathophysiology. Then you'll be given a certain number of questions that are available that have that have to deal with the cardiovascular system. But let's say you want to do something very, very specific. Let's say tomorrow, one of your professors is going to be talking about something very specific, like heart failure, right? So the good news is actually you can actually create topic-based tests here as well too. So this is actually our advanced search. So in fact, search is here, but you can also go here as well too. This is where I mentioned here. So you come up and you pop up something that looks just like a Google search bar. So you can actually type in something like heart failure, right? And then you can it can pull out every single item on heart failure. And you'll notice that, oh my gosh, there's 622 things I could be studying here. I don't have time for all that. How do I get this down to a manageable size? So the nice thing you'll notice is that we have a bunch of filters on the left side. It's called faceted search. And so you decide, hey, look, all I really want to do is QMax 1 questions. Click that. And hey, really, it's really about heart failure therapeutics. And so you can click that, and what you'll notice is as you click through, the concepts dynamically start reorganizing themselves. So you'll notice things like diuretics and things like that start popping up, right? Because they're much more related to, say, the therapeutic treatment of heart failure. So let's say we do something like furosemide. Now we're down to 23 items, much more amenable. And let's say it's I'm really interested in heart failure, where the person presents with some sort of edema, right? And so now I'm down to 13 questions, after like 3-4 clicks. And so I can create a test in tutor mode. There's multiple different types of modes, but let's go ahead and create in tutor mode. And then once you do that, and when you go to review your test, then you should see, voila, at the top, you've got your very, very special topic test. And then you can start that test, and then you can go ahead and go through it. And you'll notice that, yeah, it has something to do with heart failure. Now, heart failure may or may, in furosemides or loop diuretics may or may not be the exact subject of it, but it's going to be at least part of the story. And then what you'll notice here is after you answer a question and after you look at whether you got it right or wrong, we provide a number of additional recommendations that you can use. So, for example, if you should have chosen furosemide but you didn't, then you can actually click this. We have all these hyperlinks based on all the content that's in here, and then you can look at loop diuretics in first aid. And you can also read about loop diuretics in free open resources like Wikipedia, or you can look or you can look at an automated search at PubMed looking for review articles on furosemide. So those are a couple of resources that that's available as part of the question bank. The other thing that you'll notice, I'm going to switch to 2016 because that's what I've been working with, is that we have access directly to first aid. So you can actually look at the content. You can actually even interact with the content. So you can click here, and then you can get to a digital first aid. You can highlight it. You can add notes as well too. And then you can actually do flashcards that are associated with it. So you'll notice there's 9 flashcards that we created, kind of like Anki style flashcards. But the nice thing about that are the number of them are case-based, just like the USMLE, right? And so when you do these case-based cards or cards in general, you can self-rate yourself, and then you are given the remediation back to first aid. And then as you do it, it tracks your performance. So when you are done, let's say I'm doing okay but not fantastic, then you have a color indicator that says I've only achieved 44% competency on this topic. And so indeed, when I look at it, I'll notice that, hey, I only have 4 flashcards where I've gotten to the green zone. I've got a lot of yellow flashcards that I need to work on later down the line. And then you'll notice in your first aid table of contents, topics start lighting up in terms of red, yellow, green. And here's where I've been playing around in, biochemistry. You see, I really have a lot of work to do here, where, I haven't done as well as I should have on some of the flashcards. And so first aid's telling me I need to go.
Just lost the audio.
Dr. Lee, we've lost your audio. I believe he's trying to reestablish things, folks. Just hang on. He'll be right back.
Thank you.
Dr. Leslie, in the meantime, does anybody have any questions about what Dr. Lee's presented?
What is the biggest pitfall in first aid, and where is it lacking in most information?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear. I heard the word first aid.
Okay. What's the biggest pitfall in using first aid, and where is it lacking the most information?
So the biggest pitfall in just using first aid?
Or in first aid in general, compared to other products?
Oh, let me see. Maybe Tao's back. Maybe he can answer that.
Hello.
There he is.
Hey, I apologize. Looks like I had a bit of an internet outage. You guys still there?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, Alan, can you guys see my screen again?
Yes, we've got everything.
Okay, I apologize. Looks like there was a glitch in the internet. So I don't know where you guys lost me, but I think I was just basically saying that you know, the flashcards can provide some guidance of where your strengths and weaknesses are in first aid. So it's a very interactive way of using first aid. So I am going to actually okay, so yeah, there was a glitch, and so it kind of messed up my test as well too. So you can see that you can actually, you know, with a couple of clicks, you can go between the question bank, first aid, and the flashcards. And in the future, you'll actually be able to do it with videos as well too. The last thing I'll show you is our digital flashcards. And so you already saw some of it already, right? So first of all, you can browse first aid. The key thing you need to do is you need to tell first aid what topics you've already covered in your curriculum. The more topics you cover in your curriculum, if you check it off, like say, hey, yeah, I've covered R&E polymerases or whatever, then you're basically what you're doing, you're telling first aid it's okay to start testing you on things like, okay, go ahead and start testing me on Ehlers-Danlos syndrome or elastin and so forth, right, once you click it, right? Because once you do that, then you can do something called study stream, which is basically a daily set of flashcards that we give you. The flashcards are based on what you've studied in the past, either through first aid or in your curriculum, depending on what you check off. And as you go through the flashcards, you'll notice that we start off with things that you're familiar with, like, because you notice I spent some time on loop diuretics, but then as you go into it, then it goes to other areas, like, for example, the lymph node, right? I'm sorry, the spleen, where which I've mentioned that I've studied before. And as you do each of the flashcards, you're getting the direct remediation into first aid, which is a really nice way of interactively studying with first aid. And every time you do it, you'll get, again, the direct remediation. So that's pretty much the application. So the study stream, when you finish the cards, it will give you a stratification of your strong and weak cards. So you can go back and quiz yourself. The other thing that you can do is you can create a la carte decks. So you can create your own deck, just like you create, you know, a cube, a test, right? You know, let's say regardless of what, you know, my algorithm wants me to do today, I'm really feeling like micro. So let's just do some micro cards. So you can create micro cards. You can create up to 200 cards and flag them, or, you know, look for unused cards, or look for cards that you've done poorly on and flag those, you know, that type of stuff. So you can do that outside of the adaptive learning algorithm that's part of StudyStream. So that's a quick walkthrough of the two platforms. I do want to, you know, spend maybe a slide or two just talking about the data, about why you should be doing all this. But before we do that, I just want to see if there's any questions from the audience.
There was one question on what is the sort of greatest pitfall of USMLE RX compared to other products, and areas where you think the product is the weakest?
That's a great question. I'm getting a little bit of an echo here. You know, generally overall, it's fairly strong across the board for the most part. I would say, some of our patient safety questions need to go through a couple more iterations, but they're getting there. We are launching these new enhanced enhanced questions. Mostly you'll see them in hematology right now, but they're gonna be spreading across the QBank over the next 12 months. They'll be complete in terms of having these enhanced questions across the bank by next spring. The great thing about these questions, these new questions, is that they are very patient-centered and they're very centered around critical thinking, problem solving, and clinical reasoning, which, by the way, is something that you want to do for the rest of your life anyway. You know, it's, you know, I don't want to say too much about them publicly right now, but these new enhanced questions, you know, they have been very, very well received by our internal testing group. In fact, the majority of them are judged as being better than their UWorld counterparts. So we're pretty you know, pleased with that. You know, the only other thing is, which I don't think you have right now, is we have some videos. I think the majority of our videos are very good, but some of them can use some buffing up. So you know, so that's a quick overview. And I think we're still trying to connect everything. So the book, the QBank, and the flashcards are all in the loop. The videos aren't quite yet, but they will be. And so, in fact, that's in fact something that we're remedying in our next platform, which you will see probably towards the end of the year. So this is a platform that's in beta testing right now, but it has the ability to actually, you know, go from questions to flashcards to videos and so forth. And it has a very advanced search for test creation. So if you want to, so if you want to do it the old-fashioned way, you can, or you can just do it again, like, you know, and you can do a much more advanced search where you just Google your test, and then and then you can see, hey, these are the categories, and I want to do mostly QMAX1 and pharmacology, but then and then you know, layer it down to the concepts. Any other questions, Alan?
Just very quickly, any questions? One thing I will say is that you guys will be meeting with one of the 5 teams to go over your study plans, probably in early January, to make sure that everybody has a good, reasonable study plan. I think, Tao, you talked about last year, you had considered this USMLE, their basically work set of study questions. And then when you go into the concentrated review in the spring, most people recommend using a different set of questions. So you'll be
correct
with the material. And so these become you'll still probably want to get another set of questions like UWorld. I think we'll have many more talks about this over the next month or so. But this will be sort of your real working stuff. And then I don't know what the timing is. We are going to try and integrate the UB curriculum into USMLE, or at least the referencing. Is there an expectation that might be available by the spring?
I hope so, but you know, right now I think we're trying to get a discovery meeting set up with Mark. Is that correct? Yeah. So we've got to work through some technical due diligence and find out what's underneath the hood with your Blackboard system. Do we have another minute, Alan? I just wanted to show you a little, the students a little bit of the research behind the recommendations.
Sure.
So why do lots of questions? I think you know, I think all the students tell each other, yeah, do lots of questions. Well, there's actually some research here. Francis Deng from WashU basically came out with a paper, a single center studied, that looked at 100 and I want to say 30 WashU students, and basically question banks outperform flashcards. So flashcards aren't bad, it's just that question banks are better. And in this particular study, students were doing questions from USMLE, UWorld, and Kaplan, and basically for every 445 questions they did, they got 1 additional point on the step 1 versus versus somebody who did not. So that's one thing to keep in mind. There is another study that's just about to be published. It's embargoed right now. It'll be published at AAMC in Boston coming up. It's already been accepted. The original data was presented at AAMC in Seattle, but they took it one step further. They found out that unique questions, doing more unique questions is better than doing the same number of repeat questions. So some people may say, hey, do one QBank 3 times. No, that actually doesn't work. You actually have to do lots of unique questions. And in their study, students who did the ones that did over 3,200 unique questions did best. So as you can see, you're going to have at least 2 question banks. And then the other thing that they found was that students who did 3 or more passes through first aid did better on their USMLE, even controlling for effort or how early people studied. So, some people would think that, using first aid or the amount of work in first aid is a proxy for effort. It's not. There's something different and unique about first aid that actually helps with the USMLE Step 1 score. I mean, obviously we've felt that to be true, but these are the first people to actually prove it in a well-designed cohort study at University of Michigan. So I'll pause there if there's any other questions. Otherwise, I'll pass it back to you, Alan.
I think we'll probably wrap it up here. I really appreciate you taking the time to go over things, and we'll send the resources out to the students as well as the information that you send me. Thank you very much, and we look forward to working with you. Thanks, Tao.
All right, thank you. Everyone, good luck.